The wedding invitation felt like a slap across my face. Thick, expensive paper with gold lettering, the kind Udochi never bought me in our 3 years of marriage. "Come see how a real man marries a worthy woman," he'd scrawled on the back in that arrogant handwriting I knew too well. "Maybe you'll understand why I left you. My name is Kyoma, and if you're watching Afrilogy, you know these stories never end where they start." I stared at that invitation sitting on my small table in our single room in Makoko. The walls were thin. I could hear Mrs. Adebayo next door arguing with her husband about rent money again. The smell of fried plantains from the street vendors mixed with the stench from the lagoon. This was my world now. 3 kids, no husband, selling a cara by the bus station just to keep us alive. 2 years ago, Udochi threw us out like garbage, said I was cheating. A lie he made up because he'd found someone richer. Amaka Okafor, daughter of Senator Okafor, the man who owns half of Lekki. I'd seen her picture in the newspapers, all perfect skin and expensive weaves, standing next to her politician father. "Mama, what's that paper?" My daughter Kami tugged at my wrapper. She's 7 now, but she remembers when we lived in the big house in Surulere, when her father would lift her up and call her his princess. "Nothing, baby, just trash." But it wasn't trash. It was a challenge. And something inside me, call it pride, call it stupidity, something made me want to show up at that wedding, not to beg, not to cause trouble, just to look him in the eye and let him see what his abandonment had cost. The wedding was in 3 days at Echo Hotel. I had exactly 47 naira in my purse and holes in my only good shoes. That evening, I was cleaning the offices at Silverbird Galleria when I heard voices from the conference room. I wasn't supposed to be there. My shift ended at 8, but I'd dropped my cleaning rag and was crawling under the table to get it. "The education minister signed off on all the contracts," a deep voice was saying. "Udochi's been inflating the prices on school construction materials by 60%. We split the difference." I froze. That was Udochi's voice. "What about the safety inspections?" another man asked. "Paid off. These village schools will use our substandard materials, and if a roof collapses..." Udochi laughed. "Poor kids die all the time. Who's going to investigate?" My blood turned to ice. I knew that laugh. The same laugh he'd given when he told me our marriage was over, that I was worthless, that no one would ever believe anything I said. "The senator's daughter doesn't know?" "Amaka? She thinks I'm a legitimate businessman. Once we're married, her father's political connections will make us untouchable. This wedding isn't just a ceremony. It's a business merger." I held my breath as footsteps approached. Through the gap under the table, I saw expensive shoes, Udochi's Italian leather ones that cost more than I made in 3 months. "Dr. Dokima, you've been very helpful with the medical certifications for our workers. Fake health clearances save us thousands. Just remember our agreement, Udochi. My clinic needs that new equipment you promised." Dr. Dokima. I knew that name. He ran the government clinic in Yaba, where I'd taken my son when he had malaria last month. The same doctor who demanded a deposit before treating my dying child. They left, and I stayed under that table for 10 more minutes, my heart pounding like a talking drum. I had stumbled onto something huge, something that could destroy Udochi. But what could a woman like me do with information like this? I was nobody. A divorced mother selling food on the street. Who would believe me against a man about to marry into political royalty? I walked home through the crowded streets of Lagos Island, past the night market vendors and the Danfo buses belching black smoke. The invitation crinkled in my pocket with each step. What would you do in my place? Would you stay home and nurse your wounds? Or would you find a way to make him pay? That night, lying on my mat with my 3 children sleeping beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to that wedding, but not as the broken woman he expected to see. The next morning, I woke up with a plan that seemed impossible. But sometimes impossible is all you have left. I took the bus to Yaba General Hospital, clutching my son, Emeka's medical file. My heart was racing as I walked through those sterile corridors that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. I knew Dr. Dokuma would be there. He ran the government clinic attached to the main hospital. The waiting room was packed with mothers like me, holding sick children, counting naira notes, praying they had enough for treatment. Some had been waiting since dawn. This was the reality Udochi was stealing from. Poor families who trusted doctors like Dokuma with their children's lives. "Excuse me, I need to speak with Dr. Dokuma," I told the nurse at reception. She looked me up and down, my faded wrapper, my worn slippers, the way I clutched my handbag like it contained everything I owned, because it did. "Do you have an appointment?" "It's about my son's treatment last month. There were complications." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Dr. Dokuma in his office. He was a thin man with kind eyes and graying temples, the kind of face you'd trust with your child's life, which made what I'd overheard even more sickening. "Mrs. Chioma Okafor," I lied, using Udochi's new wife's family name. I watched his face change instantly. "Okafor? Are you related to Senator Okafor?" "His niece. I usually don't mention it, but I let the implication hang in the air. In Nigeria, family connections open doors faster than money. Dr. Dokuma straightened in his chair. "Of course. How can I help you?" "My son was treated here for malaria, but I heard some disturbing things about the clinic's practices, about false medical certificates, about taking money to overlook safety violations." I kept my voice steady, watching his face go pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Udochi Namdi. You know him well, don't you, doctor?" His hand started shaking, just slightly, but I caught it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I know about the school construction scam, about the substandard materials that could kill children, about your fake health clearances." I leaned forward. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Have you ever watched someone's entire world crumble in real time? Dr. Dokuma aged 10 years and 10 seconds. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The clinic needs equipment. The government funding was cut. I have patients dying because I can't afford proper medicines." "So you let Udochi steal from other children to save yours?" Silence stretched between us like a blade. Outside his window, I could hear the sounds of Lagos traffic, the honking of Danfo buses, the calls of street vendors, normal life continuing while we sat in this bubble of corruption. "What do you want?" he finally whispered. "Justice, but not the kind you're thinking." I pulled out my old Nokia phone. "I want you to record everything, every conversation with Udochi, every fake certificate you've signed, every safety inspection you've overlooked." "That would destroy me." "Good, because your corruption is already destroying innocent children." Dr. Dokuma stared at his hands. When he looked up, something had changed in his eyes. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was the realization that he'd lost himself somewhere along the way. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Udochi isn't just stealing construction money. He's been using his political connections through the Okafor family to cover up a much bigger scheme. Fake medical supplies, expired drugs relabeled and sold to government hospitals. People have died, Hyoma. Children have died." My stomach turned to stone. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about lives. "Will you help me stop him?" Dr. Dokuma was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small recording device. "I've been documenting everything for months. I told myself it was insurance in case Udochi tried to throw me under the bus. But really," he looked at me with eyes full of regret, "I think I was just waiting for someone brave enough to use it." As I left his office with that recording device hidden in my wrapper, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Power. Not the kind that comes from money or connections, but the kind that comes from having the truth. But truth is a dangerous weapon in Lagos, and Udochi had more to lose than I'd ever imagined. I spent that afternoon listening to Dr. Dokume's recordings in my tiny room in Makoko. My children were at my sister Ngozi's house, so I could focus without little ears hearing things that would give them nightmares. The recordings were worse than I'd imagined. Hours of conversations between Udochi and various officials, building inspectors who signed off on structures they never examined, health ministers who approved expired medicines, education officials who looked the other way while school roofs collapsed. But it was the last recording that made my blood run cold. "The wedding reception will be perfect for announcing our expansion into medical supplies." Udochi's voice crackled through my cheap phone speaker. "Once I'm officially part of the Okafor family, we can bid on every government health contract in Lagos State. Senator Okafor's connections will make us millions." What about quality control? Another voice asked. Quality is expensive. Dead poor people don't file complaints. I had to pause the recording. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This wasn't just corruption anymore. This was murder with a business plan. That evening, I walked to the internet cafe in Yaba, 20 naira for 30 minutes online. Money I couldn't afford, but I needed to research. I typed Kemisola Adebayo journalist into the search bar. I'd heard about her on the radio, an investigative journalist who'd exposed corruption in the education ministry last year. 3 officials went to prison because of her work. If anyone would listen to a woman like me, it would be her. Her website listed an email address. I stared at the blank message box for 10 minutes, trying to find the right words. How do you explain that your ex-husband is a killer who's about to marry into one of Nigeria's most powerful families? Finally, I typed, I have evidence of corruption that reaches the highest levels of Lagos state government. Children are dying because of fake medicines and unsafe school buildings. I can prove everything, but I need help. I hit send before I could change my mind. The next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. This is Kemisola Adebayo. Did you send me an email about government corruption? My heart stopped. Yes, Ma, I have recordings. Can you meet me today? There's a small restaurant in Ikeja called Mama Put's Kitchen. 2 o'clock. I'd never been to Ikeja. It was too expensive for someone like me. But I borrowed bus fare from Ngozi and made the journey, carrying Dr. Dokuma's evidence like it was made of glass. Mama Put's Kitchen was nothing like the fancy restaurants in Victoria Island, just plastic chairs and wooden tables, the smell of jollof rice and pepper soup mixing with exhaust fumes from the street. Perfect for a conversation that needed to stay quiet. Kemisola was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with natural hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She was typing on a laptop when I walked in, and she looked up as I approached her table. You must be Kioma. Sit down. I handed her the recording device with trembling fingers. She plugged in earphones and listened for 20 minutes while I picked at a plate of rice I couldn't afford. Her expression grew darker with each passing minute. Jesus Christ, she finally whispered. Do you understand what you've brought me? Evidence that my ex-husband is killing people for money? Evidence that could bring down half the Lagos state government. She leaned forward. This implicates Senator Okafor directly. His daughter is marrying into this operation. Either she knows and she's complicit, or she's being used as cover. The wedding is tomorrow. Kemisola's eyes lit up. You're going? He invited me, to humiliate me, but yes. Perfect. I need you to record everything. Every conversation, every speech, every toast. If Udochi announces his expansion plans at the reception, like he said in these recordings, we'll have him on tape confessing in front of hundreds of witnesses. She pulled out a tiny device, smaller than a matchbox. Audio recorder, pin it inside your wrapper. It'll pick up conversations from 10 feet away. I stared at the device. Such a small thing to hold so much power. What if he recognizes me? What if security throws me out? Then we use what we already have. But Kioma? She reached across the table and touched my hand. I've been investigating corruption for 8 years. I've never seen evidence this comprehensive. These recordings could save hundreds of lives. As I rode the bus back to Makoko, the recording device felt like it was burning a hole in my wrapper. Tomorrow, I would walk into that wedding reception, not as Udochi's discarded wife, but as the woman who would bring his empire crashing down. But first, I had to figure out how to look like I belonged at the most exclusive wedding of the year. That night, as I lay listening to my children breathe in their sleep, I thought about the mothers I'd seen in Dr. Dokuma's waiting room, the ones counting naira notes, praying their babies would live to see another day, the ones who trusted doctors and politicians and contractors to keep their children safe. Udochi had stolen that trust. Tomorrow, I was going to steal it back. The morning of the wedding, I stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror hanging on my wall. I looked exactly like what I was, a poor woman with 3 children and 47 naira to her name. There was no way I could walk into Echo Hotel looking like this. But sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. A knock at my door interrupted my panic. I opened it to find Ifeoma standing there with a garment bag over her arm. Ifeoma ran a small tailoring shop near the bus station where I sold Akara. We'd spoken a few times, but I wouldn't call us friends. Kayoma, I heard you're going somewhere special today. Word travels fast in Makoko. Everyone knows everyone else's business. I don't have money for clothes, Ifeoma. She smiled and held up the garment bag. Who said anything about money? My daughter Blessing was supposed to graduate from primary school last month. The ceremony was canceled because the school roof collapsed during the rains. My heart sank. Another victim of Udochi's corruption. Blessing was so excited about that graduation. She'd been saving money from selling pure water after school to buy a special dress. Ifeoma's voice cracked slightly. Now she's in the hospital with a broken leg from when the ceiling fell. I'm so sorry. The construction company that built that school, they use cheap materials. Everyone knows it. The contractor got rich while our children paid the price. She looked me in the eyes. I heard your ex-husband is getting married today. I also heard he might know something about why schools keep falling down. I didn't ask how she knew. In Lagos, secrets have wings. This dress belonged to my sister. She wore it to a wedding in London last year before she died in a car accident. I was saving it for Blessing's future graduation, but she handed me the bag. Maybe it can serve justice first. Inside was the most beautiful dress I'd ever seen. Deep blue silk with gold threading, the kind of outfit that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. Elegant, expensive, but not flashy. Perfect for blending in at a high society wedding. Ifeoma, I can't take this. You're not taking it, you're borrowing it. And when you come back, I want to hear every detail about how justice looked in that ballroom. While I changed, Ifeoma did my hair and makeup with supplies she'd brought. She had gentle hands and an artist's eye. As she worked, she told me more about her daughter. Blessing wants to be a doctor. She studies by candlelight because we don't always have electricity. She says she wants to help sick children get better. Ifeoma's hands stilled for a moment. But how can she become a doctor if the schools keep falling down? How can any of our children have a future if men like your ex-husband keep stealing it from them? When she finished, I barely recognized myself. The woman in the mirror looked confident, sophisticated, like she belonged in expensive places. But more than that, she looked dangerous. You look like someone who could change the world, Ifeoma said softly. The final touch came from an unexpected source. As I was preparing to leave, I heard a car horn outside. In Makoko, car horns usually meant trouble, police or demolition crews. But when I looked outside, I saw a black Mercedes parked in front of my building. The driver got out and approached me. He was an older man, maybe 60, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. Are you Kioma? Yes. My name is Ogbonna. I drive for wealthy families in Victoria Island. I heard you're going to a wedding today, and you might need transportation. Another person who somehow knew my story. The invisible network of Lagos was working in my favor. Sir, I don't have money for a driver. My nephew attended Blessed Hope Primary School in Surulere, the school that collapsed 6 months ago. He was 8 years old. Ogbonna's voice was steady, but his hands clenched into fists. The contractor used sand instead of cement in the foundation. Save money, they said. My nephew saved nothing. The weight of all these stories, Ifeoma's daughter, Ogbonna's nephew, the children in Dr. Dokuma's clinic, settled on my shoulders like a mantle. I wasn't just going to this wedding for myself anymore. I was carrying the hopes of every mother who'd lost a child to corruption. I can get you to that hotel and back safely, Ogbonna continued. But more than that, I know the back entrances, the service corridors. If you need to move around that hotel without being seen, I'm your man. As we drove through Lagos traffic toward Victoria Island, I checked my phone. One message from Kemisola. Recording device tested and ready. Remember, stay close to Udochi during the toasts. That's when people say things they shouldn't. The Echo Hotel rose before us like a gleaming tower, all glass and marble and money. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Range Rovers, Mercedes, even a few Bentleys. Women in designer gowns and men in expensive suits climbed the steps like they owned the world. Maybe some of them did. Ogbonna pulled up to the main entrance. Remember, Kioma, you belong here today. Not because of money or connections, but because justice belongs everywhere. I stepped out of that Mercedes, feeling like a different person entirely. The recording device was hidden in my wrapper. Kemisola's number was programmed in my phone, and I had a team of people counting on me to expose the truth. But as I walked up those marble steps toward the hotel entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Udochi had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. What if he was 3 steps ahead of me too? The Echo Hotel ballroom was everything I'd expected, and nothing I was prepared for. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks from the ceiling, casting rainbow light across marble floors that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. The air smelled of expensive perfume and power. I stood in the entrance, watching Lagos's elite mingle like peacocks showing their feathers. Women dripped in gold jewelry, men in hand-tailored agbada that cost more than my yearly rent. Everyone looked like they belonged here. Everyone except me. "Can I help you?" A security guard appeared at my elbow. Young man, probably from one of the mainland neighborhoods, doing his job for people who wouldn't spit on him if he was on fire. "I'm here for the Nnamdi Okafor wedding." "Name?" "Chioma Okafor." The lie rolled off my tongue easier this time. He checked his list, frowning. "I don't see—" "Try under family guests. I'm Senator Okafor's niece." The magic words. His attitude changed instantly, all smiles and deference. "Of course, Ma. Please go right in." I moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible but watching everything. The recording device pressed against my ribs with each breath, reminding me why I was here. Near the bar, I spotted familiar faces from newspaper photos. Commissioners, bank executives, oil company CEOs. The kind of people who made decisions that affected millions of lives from their air-conditioned offices. Then I saw him. Udochi stood near the center of the room in a pristine white agbada, gold thread gleaming in the light. He looked exactly the same, tall, handsome, with that confident smile that had once made my heart race. Now it made my stomach turn. Beside him stood his bride. Amaka was even more beautiful in person than in her photos. Perfect skin, elegant bearing, the kind of natural grace that comes from never worrying about where your next meal is coming from. She looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy. She had no idea she was marrying a murderer. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the sound system, "please welcome Senator Okafor." The crowd parted as a distinguished man in his 60s approached the microphone. Senator Okafor commanded the room without effort. Every eye focused on him, every conversation stopped. This was what real power looked like. "Today is not just about 2 young people in love," he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "It is about the joining of 2 families committed to the progress and prosperity of Lagos State." Applause rippled through the crowd. I moved closer, the recording device capturing every word. "My new son-in-law, Udochi, brings to our family a deep commitment to infrastructure development and healthcare improvement. Together, we will build a better future for all Nigerians." If only he knew how Udochi was really building that future, on the graves of children killed by his greed. After the senator's speech, I drifted toward the edges of the crowd, listening to conversations, hoping to catch something useful. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, look what the cat dragged in." I turned around, and there he was, Udochi, standing close enough to touch, his eyes cold with the same cruelty I remembered from our last fight. "Hello, Udochi. I'm surprised you actually came, though I suppose desperate people do desperate things." His gaze swept over my dress, my makeup, my hair. "Nice costume. Who did you steal it from?" Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to disappear like I had for the past 2 years. But I thought about Ifeoma's daughter lying in a hospital bed, about Ogbona's nephew crushed under a collapsed school roof, about all the mothers counting Naira notes in Dr. Dokuma's waiting room. "I bought it with the money from my new job." "Your new job?" He laughed. "Selling a Kara by the bus station isn't exactly what I'd call a career advancement. Actually, I've been working with some very interesting people lately. Doctors, journalists, politicians. You'd be surprised how many important people are interested in my story." Something flickered in his eyes, just for a second, but I caught it, uncertainty. What story would that be? The story of how my ex-husband became so successful so quickly. People love success stories, don't they? Especially when they involve government contracts and medical supplies and school construction. The uncertainty became alarm. Udochi stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you need to stop. You're embarrassing yourself. The only embarrassing thing here is how long it took me to figure out what you really are. And what's that? I looked him directly in the eyes, remembering every night I'd cried myself to sleep. Every day I'd wondered if my children would have enough to eat. Every moment I'd felt worthless because of what he'd done to us. A thief, a liar, and a killer. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin like a vice. You need to leave, now, before you say something you'll regret. Like what, the truth? The truth? His laugh was sharp and cold. The truth is that you're a bitter, delusional woman who can't accept that she wasn't good enough. The truth is that no one will ever believe anything you say because you're nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing. The words hit like physical blows, just like they always had. But this time, I didn't crumble. This time, I stood straighter. You're right about one thing. I am nothing. I'm just a poor woman from Makoko who sells food by the roadside. But you know what? Sometimes it takes nothing to destroy everything. I pulled my wrist free and walked away, feeling his eyes burning into my back. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anticipation. Because across the room, I could see Senator Okafor approaching the microphone again. And based on what I'd heard in Dr. Dokuma's recordings, Udochi was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Senator Okafor's voice boomed across the ballroom as he called for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite my new son-in-law to say a few words about his vision for the future. This was it, the moment Dr. Dokuma's recordings had prepared me for. I moved closer to the front, the recording device capturing every sound. Udochi took the microphone with that confident smile that had once fooled me completely. Thank you, Senator. Friends, family, distinguished guests, today marks not just the beginning of my marriage to the beautiful Amaka, but the expansion of our business ventures into new territories. Murmurs of interest rippled through the crowd. These people love talking business, even at weddings. With the support of the Okafor family's extensive network, we'll be bidding on major government contracts across Lagos State. Healthcare, education, infrastructure. We're positioned to make a real difference in people's lives. A difference, like the difference his substandard materials had made to Ogbana's nephew. Like the difference his fake medicines had made to countless patients. In fact, Udochi continued, warming to his theme, we've already identified significant cost-saving opportunities in medical supply procurement. By streamlining quality control processes, we can deliver healthcare solutions at unprecedented prices. My blood turned to ice. He was confessing to his corruption scheme right here, in front of hundreds of witnesses, calling it streamlining quality control. Cost saving is crucial, Senator Okafor added, taking the microphone back. Too many government contracts are inflated by unnecessary quality requirements. Real progress requires practical solutions. The applause was enthusiastic. These people weren't just tolerating corruption, they were celebrating it. That's when I saw her. A woman in an elegant gold dress was pushing through the crowd toward the front. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until she was almost at the microphone. Then recognition hit me like a slap. Amaka, Udochi's bride. But her face wasn't glowing with wedding joy anymore. It was twisted with something between horror and rage. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the applause. "Father, may I speak with you privately?" Senator Okafor looked confused but handed her the microphone. "Of course, dear, but perhaps after the toasts?" "No, now." Amaka's voice carried a steel I hadn't expected. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to share something important with all of you." The ballroom fell silent. Udochi's face went pale. This morning, I received a phone call that changed everything. A journalist named Kemisola Adebayo contacted me with some very disturbing information about my new husband's business practices. My heart stopped. Kemisola had contacted the bride directly? She played me recordings of conversations between Udochi and various government officials. Conversations about fake medical certificates, substandard building materials, and expired medicines being sold to government hospitals. The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on that marble floor. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was some kind of jealous ex trying to destroy our wedding day. but then I did some investigating of my own. Udochi was backing toward the exit, but hotel security, real security, not the young man who checked my name, was blocking the doors. I discovered that my father's political connections weren't just being used to help Udochi win legitimate contracts. They were being used to cover up criminal activity that has killed innocent people. Senator Okafor's face had gone gray. Amaka, what are you saying? I'm saying that I cannot marry a man whose wealth is built on the graves of children. I'm saying that I will not allow my family name to be used to legitimize murder. She turned to face Udochi directly. And I'm saying that the police are already on their way. That's when chaos erupted. Udochi lunged for the microphone, but Amaka pulled it away. Guests started shouting, some demanding explanations, others heading for the exits. Security moved to surround Udochi, who was screaming about being set up. In the middle of it all, I saw a face I recognized. Dr. Dokuma, standing near the bar, his phone in his hand. He caught my eye and nodded once. The recordings I'd heard in his office, he'd given copies to Kimisola. But more than that, he'd found the courage to do the right thing. "This is a setup!" Udochi was shouting. "My ex-wife put you up to this. She's a bitter, crazy woman who can't accept that I left her." That's when Amaka did something I'll never forget. She walked across that ballroom floor, her wedding dress trailing behind her, and stopped directly in front of me. "Are you Kioma?" The entire room was staring at us, hundreds of eyes, waiting to see what would happen next. "Yes." Kemisola told me what you've been through, what he put you through. She turned back to face the crowd. This woman isn't bitter or crazy. She's brave. She risked everything to expose the truth about crimes that have killed children. The weight of her words settled over the room like a blanket. These weren't abstract corruption charges anymore. These were real deaths, real families destroyed. How many children have died because of your fake medicines, Udochi? Amaka's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down her face. How many schools have collapsed because of your substandard materials? Before he could answer, the ballroom doors burst open. Police officers flooded in, led by a woman in a sharp suit who walked with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. Udochi Namdi, you're under arrest for fraud, corruption, and criminal negligence resulting in death. As they handcuffed him, Udochi's eyes found mine across the room. The look he gave me wasn't anger anymore. It was something much more satisfying. It was defeat. But the story wasn't over yet, because sometimes justice isn't just about seeing the guilty punished. Sometimes it's about making sure the damage they cause gets repaired. And Amaka Okafor, it turned out, had plans for that too. As the police led Udochi away in handcuffs, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests were shouting questions, phones were flashing as people recorded everything, and hotel security was trying to maintain order. But in the middle of all that noise, Amaka walked straight toward me. "Chioma, we need to talk, privately." She led me through a side door into a small conference room off the main ballroom. Away from the cameras and the chaos, she looked different, younger, more vulnerable. The confident politician's daughter was gone, replaced by a woman who just discovered her entire life was built on lies. "I'm so sorry," she said, and the words came out like a dam breaking. "I had no idea. I thought I was marrying a successful businessman, not a—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "A killer," I finished for her. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. When Kimisola called me this morning with those recordings, I thought it was some kind of joke, but then she sent me documentation, bank records, construction contracts, medical supply invoices. Everything matched what she'd told me. I sat down across from her, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Why did you believe her? You could have dismissed it, gone through with the wedding, pretended you never heard anything. Because of what you said in your email to her, about children dying because of fake medicines and unsafe buildings. Amaka looked me in the eyes. My younger brother died when I was 16, meningitis. The government hospital gave him expired antibiotics that made him worse instead of better. I've spent 10 years thinking it was just bad luck, just one of those things that happens to poor people. But now you know it wasn't luck. Now I know that someone like Udochi probably made money off my brother's death. Her voice hardened, and I cannot live with that. A knock on the door interrupted us. Kemisola walked in, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and that same intelligent expression I remembered from our meeting. "How are you both holding up?" she asked. "Better than expected," I said. "What happens now?" "Now we make sure this story reaches everyone who needs to hear it. But more than that," she looked at Amaka, "we make sure the damage gets repaired." Amaka straightened in her chair. "Tell me what you need." Over the next hour, the three of us planned something I never could have imagined when I woke up that morning. Amaka wasn't just the senator's daughter. She was also a trained lawyer with connections throughout Lagos state government, and she was furious. The money Udochi stole, the profits from his corruption schemes, legally it belongs to his victims, she explained. The families of children who died, the communities whose schools collapsed, the patients who received fake medicines. But how do we identify them all? We start with the evidence Dr. Dokuma provided. Every fake certificate, every substandard contract, every expired medicine shipment. We trace them back to the people who were hurt. Kemisola was typing furiously on her laptop. I can publish the full investigation in tomorrow's edition, but more than that, I have contacts at the ICPC and EFCC. This evidence will trigger federal investigations into government officials who were complicit. "Including your father?" I asked Amaka gently. Her face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "Including my father. If he knew what was happening and did nothing, then he's as guilty as Udochi." That's when the conference room door opened again. Senator Okafor walked in, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His expensive agbada was wrinkled, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "Amaka, we need to discuss this privately." "No, Father, no more private discussions, no more backroom deals." She stood up, and I could see her mother's strength in her shoulders. "Kioma and Kemisola stay. They've earned the right to hear whatever you have to say." The senator looked at me for the first time since entering the room. Really looked at me, not through me or around me like politicians usually did with poor women. "You're the ex-wife. I'm the mother of 3 children whose father abandoned them to marry your daughter for political connections." He winced. "I didn't know about the children." "There's a lot you didn't know, or chose not to know." Senator Okafor sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. "How much of it is true?" Kemisola turned her laptop screen toward him. Bank records, construction contracts, medical supply invoices, months of evidence laid out in stark detail. "All of it," she said simply. He studied the screen for a long time, his face growing grayer with each document. Finally, he looked up at his daughter. "I suspected something was wrong with some of the contracts. The prices were too low, the timelines too aggressive, but the profit margins were so attractive, and Udochi seemed to have everything under control. People died, Father." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "God help me, I know." What happened next surprised all of us. Senator Okafor reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and waited. "Commissioner, this is Senator Okafor. I need to report suspected corruption in several government contracts under my oversight. Yes, I'll be providing full cooperation with the investigation. And, Commissioner, I'll be resigning my position effective immediately." After he hung up, the room was silent for a long moment. "It won't bring back the children who died," he said finally, "but it might prevent more deaths." Amaka reached across the table and took his hand. "It's a start." As we prepared to leave that conference room, I realized something had changed, not just for me, but for all of us. We'd walked into that hotel as separate people with separate problems. We were leaving as something else. A team, a family maybe, united by the belief that truth matters more than power, that justice is worth fighting for even when the fight seems impossible. But the real test was still coming, because bringing down Udochi was just the beginning, the hard work, rebuilding what he'd destroyed, healing the communities he'd damaged. That would take everything we had, and more than we knew we had. 3 months later, I stood in the courtroom as the judge read Udochi's sentence: 15 years in federal prison for fraud, corruption, and criminal negligence resulting in death. No possibility of parole for the first 7 years. As they led him away in shackles, he looked at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. What remained was just a broken man who'd finally been forced to face the consequences of his choices. I felt something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction or revenge, but a quiet sense of completion. Justice hadn't brought back the children who died because of his greed, but it had ensured he could never hurt anyone else. But the real victory wasn't happening in that courtroom. It was happening across Lagos State, in ways I never could have imagined when I first heard that wedding invitation crinkle in my pocket. The Amaka Okafor Foundation had been established within weeks of the wedding scandal, using recovered assets from Udochi's criminal enterprises, plus matching funds from Senator Okafor's personal fortune. It had already rebuilt 3 schools that had collapsed due to substandard materials. Dr. Dokame had been suspended from his government position, but instead of disappearing in shame, he'd done something remarkable. He'd volunteered to run free medical clinics in the communities most affected by the fake medicine scandal, working without pay, using his own resources, trying to heal the damage he had helped cause. Penance, he'd called it when I visited his clinic in Makoko last week. It won't undo what I did, but maybe it can prevent someone else from making the same choices. Ifeoma's daughter Blessing had been the first student enrolled in the new Blessed Hope Primary School, built with proper materials this time, inspected by independent engineers, designed to last generations. On opening day, she'd worn the same dress her mother had lent me for the wedding, the one that had started everything. "She looks like she could change the world," I'd told Ifeoma as we watched Blessing walk through the new school doors. "She will," Ifeoma had replied. "They all will." Kemisola's investigation had expanded far beyond Udochi's individual crimes. Her reporting had exposed a network of corruption that reached from local contractors to federal ministers. 8 government officials had been arrested. Dozens more were under investigation. And new oversight protocols had been implemented for all government medical and educational contracts. But perhaps the most surprising change had happened to me. Amaka had offered me a position as a community outreach coordinator for the foundation. "You understand these communities in ways I never could," she'd explained. "You know what it feels like to count Naira notes and pray your children stay healthy. That perspective is invaluable." The job came with a salary larger than anything I'd ever dreamed of, a proper apartment in a safe neighborhood, health insurance for my children, school fees paid through university. But more than the money, it gave me purpose. Every day I worked with families affected by corruption, mothers whose children had been hurt by fake medicines, fathers whose livelihoods had been destroyed by collapsed infrastructure, communities that had lost trust in the systems meant to protect them. I helped them navigate the compensation process, connect with medical care, find legal representation. But mostly I listened, because sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is the knowledge that their story matters, that their pain is seen, that they are not alone. Today, I was heading home to our new apartment in Yaba, where my 3 children were doing homework at a real dining table instead of on a mat on the floor, where we had electricity that stayed on, water that ran clean, and neighbors who weren't worried about eviction notices. As Ogbonna drove me through Lagos traffic, he'd become the foundation's official driver, complete with benefits and a pension plan. I thought about the woman who'd walked into that wedding reception 3 months ago. She'd been desperate, broken, carrying the weight of 2 years' worth of pain and humiliation. She'd gone there expecting to be destroyed by her ex-husband's cruelty one final time. She'd had no idea she was about to destroy him instead. "Funny thing about justice," I said to Ogbonna as we pulled up to my building. "You spend so long thinking it's this big, complicated thing that only happens to other people. But sometimes it's as simple as one woman deciding she's tired of being afraid." "And sometimes," he replied with a smile, "that one woman changes everything." As I walked up to our apartment, I could hear my children laughing inside. Kemi was helping her younger brothers with their math homework, the way I used to help her when we lived in that single room in Makoko. But they weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. And not just my children, hundreds of children across Lagos State, in rebuilt schools with qualified teachers and safe structures, receiving genuine medicines from honest doctors. That night, as I tucked my youngest son into his own bed in his own room, he asked me the question that had started it all. "Mama, why did Papa leave us?" For 2 years, I hadn't known how to answer that question without filling his heart with bitterness. Tonight, I finally had an answer. Because sometimes people make bad choices, and those choices hurt the people they're supposed to love. But you know what? Sometimes other people make good choices that fix what the bad choices broke. Like you did. Like we all did together. As I turned off his light and headed to my own room, I thought about that wedding invitation one more time. Udochi had meant it as the final humiliation, the last nail in the coffin of my dignity. Instead, it had been the first day of the rest of my life, a life where justice wasn't just a word politicians used in speeches, but a living thing that ordinary people could fight for and win. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil isn't money or connections or political influence. Sometimes it's just one woman who decides she's done being invisible. And if you're still here listening to my story, if you've made it this far through everything that happened, then maybe you understand what I learned that day. Justice doesn't always come from the courts or the government or the powerful people in fancy hotels. Sometimes justice comes from people like us, people who refuse to stay silent, people who believe that truth matters more than comfort, that courage is contagious, and that even the smallest voice can echo loud enough to bring down mountains. The invitation said I wasn't worthy. It was wrong. We all are.